All right, welcome, the Hurdle Life Coach. I'm Terry Liggins, the co-founder of the Hurdle Life Coach. I'm also here joined with my co-founder, Miss Cassie Nagel. She's on the other side of the camera, actually doing some research, pulling up questions, and just getting prepared to assist me in jumping into this dialogue about this for life episode number 2. So this is a really exciting time for us at Hurdle Life. About 1 year ago, the company was incorporated, and it's been a year since. Been doing a lot of work in the community, providing education, motivation, inspiration to students of all ages and people in all stages of their lives. And Hurdle Life was spawned really from my own personal story, whereby I look at my own history of incarceration as a juvenile and as an adult. I really gather from my own challenges that I experienced in my reentry and some of the familiarities that occurred for me while being a part of the criminal justice system as a juvenile and as an adult. Ultimately, I went on to college and got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I have a minor in leadership studies, and I also have a master's in public administration. For the last 33 months, I've actually been working in reentry services as a reentry coach here in the community where I reside, here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And even more recently, just started on my journey as a full-time consultant, educator, and coach for the Hurdle Life Coach. So this is a really exciting time here in 2020 for the Hurdle Life Coach as we are unleashed to pursue the full potential of what it is that we believe is possible with this company. Part of what our strategic plans and goals are is to really provide education opportunities, to do things in the community, to do things like this on a live format, to really lift the conversation around, are we providing, or how are we doing as a community in providing quality reintegration services for the formerly incarcerated? Now, we recognize here at Hurdle Life that trauma plays a big part in that, so we do trauma education as well. We understand that this incarceration conversation impacts more than just the individual who is sentenced to time. We know that there's a family impact. We know there's an economic impact. And there's definitely individual impact that occurs with this incarceration. So we're really excited when ABC announced that they're going to do this program around Isaac Wright Jr. The story is actually inspired by Isaac Wright Jr. On the series. It's his name is Aaron Wallace, but it was an individual who was convicted to life, became a lawyer, became a prison rep, wanted to build and bolster his credibility that he can actually get himself out. And it's just an interesting, fascinating series that also lifts up and highlights some of the challenges and issues and concerns in the criminal justice system. So this program, this education and advocacy program, is a intentional effort to just leverage that entertainment medium to draw people in, to engage with us at Hurdle Life and have a conversation with a live reformer, which is myself, and talk about the things that stood out to me. You guys are welcome to comment and mention some of the things that stood out to you. If you have any questions that maybe I can answer towards the end of this live stream, I can attempt to do that. But just really to engage individuals and community around this issue because it's important, because it's very important. And it's important because we're dealing with people. We're dealing with people's lives and people's futures. And so I can go on and on and on why this is important, but let's get to some of the reason why you're here, which is to talk about today's episode. So in today's episode, there were some things that stood out to me. I know on the other side, Cassie's going to ask me some questions. She's going to field some to me. I have no idea what all of them actually are, but we're going to be authentic and just transparent with this process, because that's a big part of of what's necessary as we do this, that we be true, we be authentic, and we be ourselves. So some of the things that I noticed right away when watching this episode, the warden, she talked about shutting down solitary. And you may have caught that, you may not have caught that, but the question is why though? What is it that solitary confinement for individuals in prison, what is the benefit of that? Is that punishment? Is that consequence? Is that humane, inhumane? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? And it's just really it's an interesting thing to think about how that plays into reform measures. Now, when you think about human interaction, when you think about psychology, when you think about wellness and health, connection is a big, big, big part of that. And one of the things that you are not experiencing in solitary confinement is connection. That isolation, research is telling us and showing us that is not conducive to good mental health. So when you have individuals being consequenced, punished, I know there's the argument that people are put in there for safety, but when a person is in solitary confinement, they're absent of connection, and then that in itself begins to breed a whole nother world of challenges, issues, and concerns. So that was one of the first things I noticed her talk about in solitary, and whether or not we can think about, should that be occurring? Should that not be occurring? The prison politics, if you guys are watching and you're noticing, there's a lot of politics going on in prison. Whether this is between the inmates and themselves, whether this is between the prisoners and the inmates, different privileges that certain inmates are earning, like Wallace himself. Have you noticed how much access he has, how much free reign and roam he's getting in the prison? And that one thing that really strikes me as more fictitious than real is just, and obviously you got to expect that with this being a show, but that stuff takes a lot of time. Did you guys catch the part where he talked about, he's been in prison for about 9 years, and it took about 7 years to even accomplish that law degree, and then to really see the process of how he was able to go about obtaining that law degree and getting that sponsored. See, the goodwill of outsiders plays a big role in what type of progress or change is going to happen on the inside. If we on the outside, being community members, just allows the prisons to run as prisons the way that they run without finding ways to engage people while they're incarcerated with education opportunities, with mentorship opportunities, with arts and just spiritual options and activities. If we as outsiders do not engage individuals while they're insiders, then we just leave them in this environment that is just breeding poor behavior, bad behavior, thoughts, beliefs. One of the things that really disturbed me from watching the episode is how the unethical activity is required almost in prison. I know that, Wallace is, really weighing against what is ethical and what is moral. What is his moral duty or ethical duty to his role as a prison rep? And then, how to go about executing, getting the job done. When he told that guy that, here, these are documents for a waive your right for a hearing, but they were really release of information, that's unethical. And I don't like that. I don't like the fact that the environment in which prison breeds more unethical behavior, more criminal behavior, more manipulation. And we have to be mindful of that, understanding that if we don't integrate, if we don't intervene, if we don't do pre-entry services, that that the individuals are in there perpetuating the same type of criminal thinking and manipulative behavior that led them to incarceration in the first place. And I'm not implying that he's guilty, because we know in this case he's innocent, or for a crime that he didn't commit. But for others who are in those environments, who have had history of manipulation, history of criminal thinking, it's so difficult to rewire that when we don't have intentional education programs to kind of look at some of those things. Another part of the episode that really took me back, and it's really hard to fathom that this actually happened. That this guy is now an actual lawyer, and he's litigating, and he's defending himself and other people. Did you notice the tone in the courtroom, in the tone of the prosecutor towards Aaron Wallace, in this case, the defendant or the defense? Did you notice the conflict, the challenge of being a judge in that environment? You know, it's often perceived as, sometimes it feels like that the judge and the prosecutor are already on the same side, and that, you know, it's an uphill battle as a defense attorney, or as a person who's trying to prove their innocence. And it's tough, and it's real tough. And one of the reasons why it's tough is because the court environment breeds a competitive spirit. You know, it really felt like it was more about wins and losses than a pursuit for justice. You know, it was more about not being proved wrong and being embarrassed by doing something wrong than a real pursuit for justice. And we have to, or at least I think it's important that we engage that conversation in the courts as well, that we look at prosecutorial misconduct, that we look at, you know, judges and whether or not they're being neutral, and that we are truly pursuing justice and not just a conviction rate, but, you know, really feeling the spirit of the court, and really feeling how competitive it was very disturbing for me as well. I think about how quickly it moved, and I was so impressed with Aaron Wallace, how he was able to call out the prosecutor by saying, probably is the best that you got. Probably, you know, and so it's just really striking how the courts will use, you know, assumptives and ambiguous language and different things to just try to sway the scales of justice without even hard factual evidence. And if you're not quick enough, if you're not smart enough, if you're not in tuned and competent, you can be manipulated and exploited very quickly in the courts. And so I thought that was really interesting as well, the courtroom scene in regards to some back and forth with Aaron Wallace. There's some couple other things I saw that I think was important. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a kind of a break on my initial thoughts and field a question from my co-founder in the back there, Cassie. What type of things did you see, or what are you curious about asking me in this case?
So I noticed a lot of the same things, and I think the conversation around power dynamics is really interesting, and you see a lot of it in this episode. And even so, when Wallace's sponsor came into the prison and he sort of checked the guard at the gate about like really letting that little bit of power go to his head.
Right.
And I think you see that a lot in prison environments or law enforcement environments. And then even when that sponsor was talking to the current DA about the work that they had done
in the past,
together in the past. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting that they then sort of juxtapose that with the relationship between the warden and Wallace. And that relationship, though there's clearly a power dynamic in roles, doesn't feel imbalanced. When they are in scenes together, it feels like they're sort of on a level playing field. and it's it's respectful. It doesn't feel authoritative.
Yes.
How do you think, or do you think it's possible to move our justice system closer to that sort of relationship building where you get away from a real oppressive us versus them power dynamic, hierarchy?
Sure. Yes, I think we can. I think those are two great examples of, again, this tone and this interaction between people. I'm really finding myself really fascinated and really wanting to do some more research in what is the impact of interaction on making a difference. The type of interaction, the frequency of interaction, to your point, the tone, and whether or not you are really looking to make change based on authority and position, or if you're looking to make change based on what is morally good, what is the community good, how does this really benefit more than just me, but how does this benefit me and the person I'm working with and their family and my family and the community, and just really operating from a place not of authority. So I think it's a couple things. One, we have to be mindful of how authority and positions can go to our head and all of a sudden cause us to feel better than someone because of a position that we hold. That is working against what is this kind of, I don't want to necessarily call it a divine belief, or just a belief that everybody's created equal. We're all the same. Everybody's human beings, and we should treat each other as such. Like, right, treat people the way you would want to be treated, not what you think they should be treated because of their history or their status in life, but like, how would you want to be treated? And I think it's so important that we have examples of what that looks like. So kudos to the network for presenting actually a warden who is not allowing her position to take away from her moral compass of, this is a human being who, has a family, who has gifts, who's contributing to the reform in the system, and really looking to just not cause trouble, but make peace. And so I think it's very necessary that we have personal examples like that and that we lift that up. And then in regards to the history between, Wallace's sponsor and the current district attorney, that was just really disturbing and kind of hard to watch, because it seems like some people know that they're doing wrong and still do it anyway, because it justifies some type of career advancement and just completely disregards the collateral damage and the ripple effect of being that selfish and competitive instead of a humane and collaborative. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Another thing I saw in the is about the prison norms. So racial segregation, that is very normal in prison. I found myself thinking, like, so if in prisons, which this does happen, a natural racial segregation occurs, and you're in that environment for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, and then you're released to community. Like, how difficult is that to just rewire all of a sudden being like inclusive in nature, when for the last 6 to 10 years, you've been living in segregation on racial lines? Like, think about how difficult it would be to help someone to trust the other or a different race after living in segregation. And so what does that mean? I'm just saying, I think that we have to recognize what are prison norms. These individuals are living these norms every single day. They're wiring these different type of beliefs and behaviors. And so we have to be mindful of what they're experiencing when they're in, so we know what we're dealing with when they get out. So then we can have more compassion, we can have more patience, and we can have the type of programming that actually addresses the programming that's happening on the inside in the institution. People are released from prison and they're expected to just figure it out. When that really they need to unfigure out a lot of stuff that just happened before they can refigure out what's going on the outside. So this show is doing a great job of actually highlighting what are prison norms. Remember, the first one I talked about is manipulation runs rampant. So a person is manipulating. Wallace smuggled a phone in, right? You know, you think that it's the right thing to do, but it's not. That's a smuggle. That's contraband. And he can be penalized for that and consequence for that and put in solitary confinement for that. His visitations can be revoked. Commissary can be revoked. All these different type of things for something as simple as wanting to connect with his family. But that's manipulation. And that's breeding on the inside of those walls. And so we have to recognize what type of programming is happening on the inside so we know what type of reprogramming we have to do when they come home in reentry. So I think the program is doing a great job of showing some of these norms, racial segregation, and also some of that manipulation. There also one other thing, and I know we're going to get wrapped up here. It looks like I think I'm about close to time. People join those gangs in there for protection. That was one of the things that I heard him say, you know, that he didn't even want to join the gang. Matter of fact, it's a whole nother part of the storyline was the whole syphilis thing and the intimacy between inmates. And you know, I'm not going to deep dive into all of that, but man, I'll tell you what, that prison environment breeds some different behaviors, and it puts you in a position that you would do things that you wouldn't normally do for comfort and for security. You join gangs. You know, you engage in ways that you hadn't before. And it's all survival. And it's not to cast judgment to say what's right and what's wrong. We're just saying what is. You know, what is occurring in the prison walls. You know, because sometimes that sexual intercourse is consensual. A lot of time or most of the times it is not. So now all of a sudden you got individuals being raped in prisons, you know, and there's a whole nother conversation around the type of trauma that induces and the fear that they live in and how that impacts them over time. And so a lot going on in there. How am I doing on time?
You got about 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought I was a little closer than that. Do you have another question for me? Or another comment?
So you talked a little bit in the beginning about the ethics.
Yep.
And it made you uncomfortable.
Yep.
That they sort of normalize like the cheating in terms of when he got
the records.
The medical records.
Yep.
Right. And I think what's interesting is, so that hit me too a little bit in like watching it. You know, you felt like, oh, that's not right. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, just before that, another inmate was essentially saying, like, great, get him out and serve him up to be beaten or killed or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it to me really brought up some thoughts about like what is more important in terms of the ethics and the morality of like taking each person just in their humanity and their inherent worth as a human versus like the ethics of following the rules. Mm-hmm. You know, and why does it seem worse that he went about it the wrong way and lying to get the medical records, but yet we kind of are okay with somebody saying it's okay to let that guy be killed or beat up because he's a Nazi and he's a bad guy anyway. Yeah.
I would say they're both not okay. It's not okay, period, to have an inherent hate or despise or for someone just because of their race. We don't want to at all support, encourage, or normalize racial segregation or this idea of white supremacy, black supremacy. Don't matter what it is. Like, science tells us that this whole thing called pigment is like, what, 0.1% of my actual makeup. You know what I mean? Like, I'm way more human being than black. And we're all very much more human being than the race. And so that's all distortion. So it is inappropriate for that African-American male to be okay with the guy coming out and being killed off and beat up just because he's white, just as much as it's not okay for Wallace to not be honest in that moment to say, this is for your medical records. So, because I have no compromise in this area because I coach individuals out of criminal thinking. I understand that sometimes in environments or in moments you think you can go about doing the right thing the wrong way and justify the ends through unethical means. No, you got to do the right thing the right way every time. That's true integrity. That's real integrity. That needs to be coached and demonstrated in prison, out of prison, and everywhere. Because if and when you allow yourself to cut corners or take shortcuts, that is a manipulation, that is a criminal thinking that can perpetuate, and that small thing can turn into a tall thing, and before you know it, you're on the other side of the walls doing time in prison or jail because you justify manipulation, dishonesty, hate. Not okay. So, I mean, to your point, I think I love that you catch that on both sides. Are we being fair on both sides? I know through my lens, I'm saying that they're both out of line for that type of belief set, for sure. Another thing that I actually have here, since I got a little more time, I think I imagine, is really the daughter lying about where her dad was while they're away. Just recently here in Sioux Falls, we had a moderation, a discussion around the impact of incarceration on family and on workforce. And it's just not the individual that's doing the time. The family's doing the time with them. And they're not just dealing with the person being away. They're dealing with shame. They're dealing with embarrassment. They're dealing with fear. And we, as reformers or as community members or as people who care, support services for children of incarcerated parents, very important as well. Work we need to be doing, work that some of that work is being done here in the community, and we want to lift that up. And so part of also what we are going to do with this live stream is invite people in our community, this community. I know there's people watching from all over. I really appreciate my friends out of Nebraska watching, people from outside of Sioux Falls watching. I really appreciate you guys. Like one of my best friends, Kiana, I think she's in St. Louis. Appreciate you watching as well. But here in the community, we're going to do things. You're going to be invited to join us in person. And so one of the things actually is this Friday, we're doing a meet and greet at Monk's downtown in Sioux Falls here. I'm doing a meet and greet with, I think it's the Libertarian Party. They're having an event there. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the criminal justice bills that are happening, being lobbied at the legislation level right now, and are being, what do they call it? Not lobbied, the bills that are being heard. So, well, my friend Lisa Nolan is going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm also going to talk about the work that I'm doing with Her to Life, some of the groups that I'm a part of right now as I'm advocating and doing ministry work with the homeless and the formerly incarcerated. So that's this Friday, 6:30, down at Monk's, maybe 7 o'clock. Come at 6:30, just in case it starts at 7. Come early. And we're actually going to be having some other events too. We're actually planning to do a monthly events. We want to create a Her to Life community of people who have been impacted by the justice system to come in and be heard, to be helped, to be guided. Also people who want to mentor and coach and guide them and just support the efforts. And so we're going to be doing a lot of things. I'm going to be also letting you guys know some of the things that are happening here in the community. How am I doing on time now?
You're a minute over.
I'm a minute over? Yes. So you are encouraged to comment or ask questions, we'll review back the live stream. I'm going to get some help from some other administrators to the page. I really appreciate the support and the team that I have here helping me at Hurdle Life. And so if you have questions that you want me to answer, or you're thinking about asking, or any type of feedback, I can provide some of that kind of like on the next go round, and kind of like address some of the things. Or who knows, maybe I'll pop up in the middle of the week. We'll figure out what's going on here with that. But please, you're encouraged to engage with us. You're encouraged to lift the conversation. And I just thank you all for joining me and Cassie. Say bye, Cassie.
Bye.
Here on this first launch of this new education and advocacy program around the series For Life. It airs again next Tuesday, 9 o'clock. We'll be right back here, 10 o'clock, going live. It's actually a 12-week series. So yay, I get to do this for 10 more weeks. And I'm excited about it because this is very, very important work. Again, I appreciate all the personal support, all the people that have chimed in today to let me know that you care about this like I do. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are the wind beneath my wings. Thank you so much. Hurdle Life.